Hello. Looks like we have some great participation here today. I'm so excited about this webinar and the work ahead. So I am Monica Gerhardt, and if it's okay, we're going to, in the interest and respect for your time, we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got an incredible time planned ahead and are looking forward to sharing all this information. I'm Monica Gerhardt. I'm the Executive Director of Gulf States Renewable Energy Industries Association, JISRIA. We're the regional trade association for companies in all parts of the supply chain and really wanted to take this moment to do a deep dive on the New Orleans VPP. What's exciting about this is, in December of 2025, the New Orleans City Council, which regulates our local utility, their local regulator for vertically integrated utility, passed this incredible VPP to support grid resilience. And what's novel about this relative to VPPs across the country is the $30 million non-federal investment that reportedly puts us at the largest VPP per capita in the United States. And so there's a lot to celebrate here. I wanted to very quickly, but both now and probably at the end, plug JISRIA's September conference, which will be in New Orleans. It's a regional conference with participation for Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama markets. We're excited about it. It's, September 18th. You can go to our website to learn more. We'd love to include you. And really, we are in the middle of this docket, which we expect outcomes end of August, beginning of September, right around our conference. And this program should begin spending by Q4 of 2026. And so while we are in this moment of continuing to collect comments, we wanted to create an opportunity to not only share information and let you know what's coming, but also hear your incredible expertise and collect your ideas. So we're going to continue to encourage you to throw your ideas into the chat, engage in the Q&A, and we really want to make this a process where we can hear from you in a way that sometimes the docketed responses don't provide for the kind of nuance that's really available. And so we want to hear your ideas, big and small. That said, I want to introduce Corey Geiger. Corey is the Chief Operating Officer for Enstal United States, a family of companies that design and manufacture solar mounting solutions. Our Enstal's brands include Iron Ridge, Panel Claw, and Quick Mount, all technology-driven innovations of bankable mounting solutions that focus on creating the best installer experience to minimize both project cycle times and errors while maximizing project return on investment. Corey applies nearly 15 years of experience in the solar industry to lead the worldwide supply chain that powers Enstal's US brands. In 2024, Corey joined the board at the Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA, a leading national trade association for the solar and storage industry, of which JISRIA is an affiliate, as the chair of its manufacturing division. And so where Corey contributes his supply chain expertise to the solar industry's advocacy efforts at the federal and state levels in the United States. And let me just say that we are honored and thrilled that Corey has graciously contributed his time and efforts and talents and expertise to join us on this webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Corey.
Well, thanks very much, Monica. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited about this opportunity. Uh, I think just the little bit of setting the table that Monica just did for us, I consider the opportunity that's in front of the city of New Orleans to be remarkable and somewhat unique and potentially really groundbreaking. And I will tell all of the folks here that are attending that, like many of you, I'm here to learn, to understand the potential we might have if we can approach this in a certain manner to take the $30 million that's available to us and deploy it to maximum benefit to the various communities in the city of New Orleans, and actually set an example for the rest of the country around how we can continue to improve quality of service and resilience to all of the members of a community, while at the same time taking some pressure off the grid in the near term. So I'm really excited to get going here. I'm going to introduce our panelists here in just a second because we've got some folks that can provide some unique and complementary perspectives to what we're doing. But first, I just want to go through a couple of bits of mechanics here. All the participant microphones have been muted. So what we're really hoping that you'll do is take advantage of the, the question and answer that you can put together that's actually in, there's a chat setting down at the bottom if you're using the Zoom app. Please throw your questions into the Zoom. What we're going to be doing as we move through the webinar is we'll be pulling some of those questions together and bringing those back as we finish the prepared material that we have today. We're leaving plenty of room to make sure that we can treat some of those questions. So please don't be shy and don't wait for us to finish talking. Just throw them in and we'll sort it out from there. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce our panelists alphabetically here. I'm going to start with Mr. Jeff Canton, who is the founder and president of Solar Alternatives, which is a design and build firm that's focused on clean energy development. Jeff and his firm are leaders in microgrid technology, electric vehicle infrastructure, and solar energy systems for business, government, and residential clients. And they have over 2,000 regional projects that the firm has completed to date. Jeff is also a co-founder of the Regional Solar Trade Association, JSRIA, which is hosting this webinar. And he's testified for the past 12 years at state commissions and local councils on the behalf of clean energy. He holds a degree in electrical engineering from Rice University, as well as a PVIP certification from the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners. Jeff, thanks a lot for being with us today. Next up would be JD Sorrentino. JD is based in Austin, Texas, and he works with a company called NeoVolta. Jeff has more than 10 years of experience in renewable energy, and he's really focused on helping drive the adoption of clean energy solutions with a heavy reliance on innovation, sustainability, and advancing the transition to a cleaner energy future. JD, thanks a lot for joining us today. And last, but certainly not least, is Zach Franklin. Zach is the Strategic Impact Officer at Grid Alternatives, the country's largest nonprofit that builds community-powered solutions to advance economic and environmental justice through renewable energy. Zach has been at Grid for over 20 years and focuses on organizational strategy and new initiatives. Prior to that, Zach worked for several years in the affordable housing industry. So as you can see, based on the backgrounds of our panelists here, we're going to bring a wide variety of different points to this conversation. And what we're going to do, given that Jeff is New Orleans based, I apologize. We're going to do a Zoom question first. So we're going to start with a couple of polls here, folks, and they're going to punctuate our conversation today as we move along. And we actually are really interested in you just going ahead and ticking the boxes here and just letting us see the results. Just to get a good feel for our audience, could you let us know if you have experience with VPPs in other parts of the US? And in addition to that, are you currently active in the New Orleans market? Just go ahead and tick them, and I'll pause for a moment and take a breath. And Monica, what I'm going to ask you to do, since you can probably see the ticker, you let me know when you're ready to move on. Oh, there we go. All right. Well, I can say that I count myself among those that don't have direct experience with VPPs. I am involved in some things right now, but I can't say I've seen one from stem to stern yet. And it's really great to see that more than half the folks that are on this webinar are active in the New Orleans market. So hoping to make this a really valuable conversation for you. All right, we ready to go? I'm going to tee Jeff up here. So Jeff, Monica sort of set the table for us. but could you talk a little bit about sort of what a $30 million grant could do for us, what it maybe isn't enough to do for us, and how you see us sort of making this work for the broad community bases in the New Orleans area?
I had to find the mute button. And thank you, Corey, and thank you, Monica, for putting the webinar together, and everybody for joining. This is a really it's a great initiative by the city, in part, large part due to the leadership of the city council and some of the advocates that have been pushing, including GSRIA, for this program. The What we're talking about is really, I want to make sure we understand it's two pieces, right? They fit together very important ways. But the VPP that we're talking about it's a mechanism that is built and run currently by the utility company, Entergy New Orleans, through Energy Hub, that signs up end users, right? So behind the meter battery systems, typically battery and solar systems that are going to be dispatchable together as a single power plant, right? And that mechanism, anybody with an existing battery can do it. People that come through the new program can do it. So it's going to be a really important resource. Uh, that is functionally separate from the incentive program that the city's been developing for quite a while now. We've been talking about it going on maybe a year, and I think in the last few months, the procedural schedule has been moving forward. And that DER program really provides the funding to drive an expansion of the VPP and of those distributed resources. So, you're not going to build just a centralized power plant with $30 million, right? But you can begin to spur a growth of a resource that is both helpful as a tool for the city and for the utility to keep the lights on when the grid is struggling, and also for those individual endpoints to be a resource for the end users, whether it's a home or a business, or in a large number of cases, increasingly resilience hubs. So it's both a grid and a community benefit as a city, but it's also a community benefit from an end user, and neighborhood opportunity. And we can speak to that, having seen so many programs like the Community Lighthouse program that has adopted solar battery installations that are in the range of maybe 100 kilowatt hours and 40 or 50 kilowatts of solar, a little bit larger than that, and all the way down to residential size systems that are more, of a 10 kilowatt solar, 20 kilowatt hour battery systems, right? So, we see those out there in the world, helping individually right now, those end users, but also helping that community. The Resilience Hub model, it's really getting proven out here together New Orleans and together Louisiana and their partners and the facilities that they're working with, a lot of churches, community centers, IBEW in Baton Rouge. They're all proving out that the Resilience Hub model really does help the community, and it does provide a lot of value in the neighborhoods that they're in. And all together, being able to tie those together in a VPP provides an enormous benefit for the broader region, because it allows the utility yet another tool to deal with supply and demand issues, which we're seeing more of in recent years. We've been seeing blue sky issues, such as last May when we had a beautiful Sunday afternoon and two nuclear plants stripped offline, and somebody had to get cut out, and half New Orleans got cut out for most of the afternoon. So it's a very real problem we're having these days, and these tools are helping communities such as in Texas, where you have a lot of active VPPs that are run a little bit differently, but they're actively helping that market manage demand and supply and demand right now. And so, when you think about what other investments we can make that have such multiple benefits, and including, hazard mitigation, disaster preparedness, there's a lot to stack onto the value that the program brings, and there's a lot that we can do to expand beyond just what we're talking about with the 30 million that the city is setting aside for this. I have to remember the program does stack on top of the remaining federal credit for commercial or leased systems that are out there for 30, 40%, depending on the mechanism you use. So it is something that we can magnify into much more than than simply that, and we can start, a bit of momentum in the market that we hope to build on going forward.
That's great, Jeff. One thing I'm going to pile on top there, and then we'll throw another poll question out real quick before we move to JD. You just talked about the fact that this benefit will actually stack on top of some federal benefits, and in this particular case today, we're talking about we're going to end up using a term, folks, called DERs, which is distributed energy resource. And the cool thing about distributed energy resources is they tend to include batteries. And the federal tax credit for batteries is actually due to last for several more years. So this is something that if we can deploy an effective program here, we can probably attract additional support and count on continued federal tax credit support for several years into the future. So I think that's really strong. Thanks for all of that, Jeff, and appreciate you setting the table for us. Monica, do you want to put that next question up? Here we go, folks. I think you can probably read it for yourself if you take a minute here and let us know how you would rank these issues. That would be really helpful. I think you're picking the one that's most important to you. All righty. How are we doing there, Monica?
Great. Let's capture it.
Awesome. Here we go. I need to take a look at this. Well, this is awesome, frankly. Clarity around guidelines, which we're going to ask Zach to speak to here in a few minutes. The ease of interconnection is something that maybe we can ask JD to talk to right now. So, JD, let me go ahead and set you up here a little bit. When we think of programs like this, it's really common, especially in the media or in public forums, to turn things like this into sort of like a win-lose. Somebody's got to lose here. And some people say, well, the utility is going to lose. And some people say, well, the ratepayers are going to lose. And I'm just curious as to your perspective, does this really have to be win-lose, or is there a way for everybody to win here?
Yeah, great question. It's definitely a win-win-win scenario here. Because yeah, a lot of people think, why would a utility pay for their customers to install renewable energy sources, right? And on the utility side, for one, it's going to help bring costs down. I mean, Jeff talked about resiliency a little bit, because in times, let's say in the middle of the summer, you hit, 95, 100 degrees, people are running their ACs, demand is going to increase. What happens is the utility has to pull from what are called peaker plants, which are typically, a lot dirtier energy, a lot more expensive energy. So in a VPP scenario, where you have a network of distributed energy resources, or DER, the utility is then able to pull from those units. And it's going to be a lot more localized because people are installing on their homes, they're installing in community areas where you're not having to pull from faraway sources. So that's going to help bring costs down a lot. Also, the install time, just the deployment of these systems, takes 1 to 2 days to install. Of course, there's going to be permitting process. It can be about 2 to 3 months from when it actually gets up and running, but the actual installation and deployment construction is very simple. So that also helps the utility have to avoid investing in repairing power lines, in increasing their overall output with expensive power plants. So on the utility side, that's also going to help them keep rates down on the homeowner side. And then for homeowners, one obvious benefit is that with energy storage, if the grid goes down, you're going to have power still. So, in an area on the Gulf Coast, we see a lot of hurricanes, see a lot of storms, people lose power quite a bit. You're still going to have power for important appliances during those outages. And then also there's performance payments from the utility. So when the utility is pulling power from you, they're going to credit you back. I don't think we have the numbers on that yet, but there's also going to be some benefit on the homeowner side there as well. And then lastly, benefit for everybody is that by avoiding going to these peaker plants, also by installing more renewable energy, it's just going to have an overall better effect on the environment as well. So I mean that's why I would say it's a win-win-win for the people of New Orleans as well as even the utility.
So I hear continuity and resiliency for ratepayers and residences and businesses. I'm also hearing that we potentially get to either defer or avoid some huge investments in either the grid or in additional peaker plants as we have more and more events and as we have more and more demand. So in a sense, everybody all around gets to benefit from this, and we get that cherry on top of the sundae here, where we actually get speed to market, which is all really encouraging. So that's fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, JD. Now, as I understand, these things can be a little complex to put together, and sometimes people might stop and think, well, the only people who are going to benefit from this are big businesses. Maybe that's the way this is going to go. But I get the impression that there are ways to structure these things, and we have some precedents in some other places where even folks that are maybe less advantaged are in a position to really take it, get some real benefits from this in sort of real time. And Zach, I know you at Grid have a lot of experience with doing some of these things in some other places in the country. It'd be great if you could speak to us a little bit about some of what Grid has learned over the years around sort of the best way to put these things together. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Corey, and appreciate the opportunity to kind of bring perspective from, about 25 years or so about, helping design and helping different utilities and agencies, put together programs like this that work. I'm going to share a few quick slides just to kind of show some technical information about some of these learnings, if that's okay with everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So can folks see my screen okay? Great. Excellent. Well, so I think, from a 1,000-foot level, again, we're a nonprofit mission-driven organization. And so from a mission perspective, we really think about these programs, particularly when we talk about what we're going to talk about in terms of the what's called LMI or low to moderate income components of these programs, around meeting people where they're at, meeting the community where they're at. Right? Because I think there's a technical side of this and there's a community side of this. And so our background and expertise and learnings are, about bringing those two pieces together. And so what we've seen over the years with these LMI or low and moderate income programs is that the way to make them work successfully is to not think about a program for everybody and then just make a few extra tweaks to that program model, throw a few extra dollars in the kitty, and assume that that's going to work for everybody. And really that just relates to what we see in all of our communities, New Orleans, but also communities across the country, where there's a huge divide in our communities. Different statistics we've seen from the Federal Reserve, over a third of American households say they don't have, the money to cover a hypothetical $400 expense. And so when you start talking about programs that assume that people can make certain types of capital investment to unlock the program, right, that works for some people and not others, right? The flip side is those folks with the greatest need for these programs, right, are these same households that can't put that $400 together in many cases, right? Folks who may be not only from an economic perspective in terms of the money that they'll save by participating in a VPP, but also folks where if you can help them get a battery so that when the power goes out, when there's the hurricane, they can still have power in their refrigerator and their food doesn't spoil, that folks can make sure that their medical devices, their CPAP machines continue to function, right? So there's this really important kind of like need dynamic. And so what we've seen is that the most successful programs kind of really take two parallel approaches. You have like a mass market program that's really driven by people's ability to bring in their own capital to stretch those dollars further. So sort of a top-down approach for the mass market program. And then a second LMI or low and moderate income program that kind of works from the bottom up based on need. And what happens is if you do it right, they meet in the middle and everybody has an opportunity to participate. And I think that's what you want to do, particularly for programs like this, where every single resident in New Orleans is a ratepayer who should have an opportunity to participate. You have to make sure that there's an opportunity, for everybody, right? And so that's what we've seen be successful in other places. There's some incentive programs that I can briefly touch on here that kind of illustrate that. On the solar side of things, we've been very involved since 2009 with a program called SASH, right? This provides full cost coverage for low-income homeowners to go solar, to really focus on those energy cost burdens, folks who are dealing with really high electric bills, and looking at that as the lens that we look at it to. But going back to, what, Jeff and Carter were saying, it also still, you can pair that with, for example, leveraging these tax credits on behalf of low-income folks, so that you can stretch the local dollars as far as possible. And again, the nice thing here is that the battery storage tax credit, as Corey mentioned, is I think it runs through 2031 or 2032 or something like that. And then the last piece is you can incorporate co-benefits for the community. If you are going to make targeted investments in low and moderate income communities, you can make multiple wins. You can incorporate, job opportunities and workforce development training for communities in the process of deploying these technologies. So on the battery storage side, a program called SGIP is another kind of set of data points. And again, there was sort of two versions of it. One where there was sort of a goal to provide low-income folks with all the resources that they needed to make it work. It had limited uptake. We were able to make it work by basically stacking it together with other programs we were doing. But the current program really kind of just said, no, we're going to make sure that low-income folks have everything they need, particularly folks who are highly impacted by power shutoffs. This is in California, so one of the big issues is wildfires and power being shut off because of the fires. And one of the key things here is that it does tie into VPP programs, but going back to program design, the incentives for being part of this VPP over time were funded separately, right? And so really the funding from the program just focus on what do people need from an upfront capital perspective to be even able to participate at all. So these are some of the data points we've seen, and I think the key takeaways that we take from that for New Orleans is just provide full cost coverage for the folks with the greatest need, right? The folks who can't necessarily, put together $400 for basic expenditures, let alone put thousands of dollars of capital into something like a home battery. That's really how you maximize program success and make sure that the folks who could benefit the most aren't locked out unintentionally by well-intended program design that assumes that maybe people can bring in capital that they can't. And that those performance payments are critical, and they provide people, they're not incentives, they're really paying people for a service, right? So if their battery over time is helping the whole community can kick in a couple of bucks to provide those, services. So it's not a substitute for the upfront, but it's a natural complement to it. We do think that finding synergies with other programming. I know, Monica, you mentioned in the chat, right? There may be some solar dollars that the city has available. That just makes it more efficient. It both deepens the savings for folks who are struggling with high utility bills, but also just makes program implementation more cost effective for the agencies involved. And I think if you're really thoughtful, you can stack it together with third-party ownership structures that allow for these tax benefits to accrue without creating unintentional consequences in terms of encouraging low-income families to take on debt, because I think debt offerings are one way to kind of leverage these tax credits, but those can have a lot of unintended consequences in our communities. We think that like the best place for low-income debt offerings, it tends to be more in the multifamily low-income sector, so like apartment buildings, affordable housing. That's where you can really use debt offerings to make it work for low-income folks, but where the counterparty, instead of being Ms. Smith and Mr. Rodriguez, is a nonprofit that owns the building that really has the sophistication to take on a debt offering. So, we have friends like folks like Finance New Orleans who are working on stuff like that on the multifamily space. So I will stop sharing my screen, but hopefully some of this is helpful on the technical side as we start to think about how to make this program work for everybody.
Yeah, Zach, thanks for all of that. There was a whole lot there. And I know, Monica, you're about to tee up another polling question. Um, I'm going to net a couple things out that I learned from that. The first is there's no reason for us to have to make hard choices that exclude certain groups from other groups. There are intelligent ways with precedents where we could set these things up. The other thing I heard, though, is that there's a potential to actually attract more money if you if between potential additional tax credits, folks that are already operating in this space, nonprofits, city funds. I think Monica, you talked about CPRG funds. So in a sense, if we structure this right, we get that 30 million to look a lot bigger than 30 million, and that's super cool because that just means we're not talking about slicing a pie. We're talking about an expanding pie, and that's fantastic. But it sounds like the key is getting this thing structured correctly out of the gate. So that's fantastic. We're going to pause here for a sec. I'm going to do something mechanical too, folks. Go ahead and take a look at the poll question while I let you know this. If you haven't figured it out yet, you can always dump a question in the chat. But there's also, if you happen to use the app and you look at the very bottom, you'll see 3 dots in a circle and a more. In there, you'll actually find a Q&A flow as well. So you're welcome to select that there. And once you've done it once, then you'll get a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen as well. So, don't be shy. Let's hear from you. If you haven't yet, please rank which VPP benefits you feel are most important to you. We'll take a second here. Holy moly, this one's colorful. So I'm assuming that one is the most important here, Monica. Is that right? So I have to say, yeah, I love this. The whole focus here. I think people are seeing this the same way that we here on hosting and on the panel see it as well. This is really about resilience. It's also about reducing costs for ratepayers, which, by the way, if you're reducing costs for ratepayers because of the rate of return model that utilities use, that means you're reducing costs or at least deferring costs for utilities as well. So we're seeing here a little bit of that win-win-win that JD was talking about a minute ago. Thanks for this. That's really cool. We're going to switch a little bit because Zach really talked to us about the way you can turn the structuring of this intelligently into an expanding pie that attracts more funding on top of that 30 million. But that doesn't mean we're leaving out folks that aren't in multifamily or in lower medium income communities, right, Jeff? We could, we tend to think of things in the solar world. We tend to think of like resi and commercial, but what that ends up ultimately meaning, resi means single family homes in practicality, and commercial ends up meaning pretty much everything else that isn't utility in a sense. So Jeff, can you sort of complement what Zach was just saying about ways that we can include the other elements of the community that might not be in the LMI group?
That's a great question. And, it's exactly like you say, the what we often call commercial is really the everything else bucket, anything that's not a single family home. And that's really the distributed space. There's so much that's based around the standard connection that a home has to utility, a 200, 400 amp single phase service, that, anything else is a bit more custom, a little bit more industrial. So, yeah, we certainly have single family homes. Multifamily is, sometimes it gets lumped in there, but multifamily really is as commercial scale and design a project as anything. And we can't leave them out of the equation. That was actually New Orleans' first real commercial scale microgrid was a multifamily inspired by a local architect firm, Eskew Dumez Ripple, with some funding from Entergy that also in turn inspired some of the other programs, such as Community Lighthouse, because it showed that model, that technology was viable during Hurricane Ida. That was a 50-unit apartment complex in mid-city New Orleans. And so that scale, 200 or 400 kilowatt hours of storage, 50, 100, 150 kilowatt hours of solar, that ends up providing a lot more resources both to the facility and the end users as to the grid, right? If you actually need that resource during a stress time on the grid in a VPP. So when we think about the kinds of facilities we're talking about, multifamily is in that bucket, that other bucket. A lot of the resilience hubs, I mean, all the resilience hubs really that have come through programs such as the Community Lighthouse program from Together New Orleans, the Get Lit Stay Lit program with restaurants through the Feed the Second Line organization. Those are providing end users, both the end users, the businesses, churches, organizations that are hosting them, the benefits, but their immediate communities around them and then the broader community in the VPP. But a lot of it is you wouldn't often think why would a church need a battery, right? Or why would a restaurant need a battery? But those provide some of the most critical services after storms here, especially because you have such a need for food resources, for cooling centers after storms. They provide a lot of value there. But you have to think of everything beyond that if we're talking about how do you reach the rest of the market. I know we, for example, have done the solar battery, solar microgrids, as diverse facilities as a wine supply warehouse, medical facilities, financial services facilities, a lot of places that often they're going to impact not only their business, but their other businesses and other organizations if they're not operating and individuals. If there are outages or if there are grid issues longer than a few days. So it really is a broad market. You have government, which is a little bit different animal, government and public facilities that are their procurement processes are a little bit different. Their decision-making processes are different, but also provide broader community support. But you almost have to think categorically around the non-residential, non-single family residential world, the types of facilities to engage. I know one of the groups that has had a large interest in renewables lately is the cold storage industry. They've got to keep, they've got a lot of product to keep online, right? And so how do they do that in a cost-effective way that doesn't rely on traditional gas generators, which we've found have a lot of problems after running for a few days, and outages down here can last for weeks sometimes. So I think we as a practical matter, both from the individual facility benefit and from tying these resources all together into a VPP, all these facilities should be on the table and think about how we can help them help us at the end of the day.
That's fantastic. And I was listening to you, and it's like a tick list of success stories where things have been done on a small scale and across various demographics here, including business and just regular people. And it sounds like there's a nice body of work that's already been accomplished in the New Orleans area that we can tap into for experience and for some recommendations. But I can't wait, since we're on this, and Jeff, you've given us one side of this and Zach's given us the other. We've got a question from Todd in the Q&A here. And Zach, he asks whether there'll be opportunities for community groups who do solar resilience work through workforce development to tap into programs like this. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say the answer is yes, but with a little asterisk at the end, right? So the short answer is yes, and we've done a lot of work exactly like that about how to, embed opportunities for community groups to participate, workforce development opportunities, job opportunities. There's a huge need for kind of like living wage career pathways that can be layered in here. The asterisk is that it's not necessarily coming from the program itself, right? Those opportunities aren't baked into the incentive that the utility provides. They really have to come from partnerships in the community that are designed to leverage that incentive. And that's something that, we've been doing for 25 years. I know folks like Jeff's group had a lot of experience with. And so I think that's the benefit of there, being some runway between now and the program hits the ground, is that it allows for folks to say like, hey, how do we put together collaborations and partnerships so we can kind of bake that into the cake? Right, because it's not coming in the cake that's coming from the utility, but it doesn't mean that we can't make something awesome with it.
That's Zach. As you're answering that question, I'm thinking about what you told us a little bit earlier, which is you set this program up right, and it starts to attract funding and initiatives like that because they see the expanding pie nature of a well-structured program, right? would you say that creates the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, like you said earlier, there's always the ability to have this be the starting point and not the ending point,
Well
right? And
said.
then you bring in additional capital, you bring in additional partnerships. But it's always great to have that initial, kind of launching point to be able to make sure people are busy, right? In order to put together these financing structures, in order to put together these partnerships, you have to know the juice is worth the squeeze, right? So by having this kind of like, catalytic investment, right, that really kind of creates the kind of the opportunity for us to say, okay, how do we maximize this? How do we get the most community benefit for everybody out of this opportunity?
Yeah, that's great, Zach. Thanks for that. The questions are starting to trickle in, and these are great questions. Um, Jeff, there's one here from Mark, asking about the compatibility of the VPP funding with third-party ownership structures, particularly around the storage side. Um, are you in a position to take a look at that real quick and tell us what you
Yeah,
think?
I was reading that as well. I was looking through the notes that I have in the VPP program. I don't really see any limitations or awareness or interest of any kind in the program, whether it's owned by the end host or not, right? Whether if it's a behind the meter system and it's registered with the VPP program on that meter, then uh, that system will be eligible. I think the item that might need to be worked out is if you are a third party system owner, but the system is registered through the meter of the end user, then you may need, then the end user may be the one getting the payments for it, right? So if the idea is how do you make sure, or if a TPO program needs to send that incentive to the TPO, to the third party owner, then the program would need to, the VPP, have awareness of that and direct the funds there. So I don't think there's uh, let's say eligibility problems, but there might need to be a component of the VPP, that is, if can payments be directed to third party owners if it's not, the owner is not the homeowner or the building.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for answering that. I'll contribute my own perspective. Folks, I happen to live and work out of Reno, Nevada, and Reno is really close to Lake Tahoe, and so when California has a forest fire, they cut off our power. So VPPs are of great interest in this area as well. We also happen to be an ideal spot to put data centers. So VPPs, the sense of urgency piles on, and we are talking to folks in this area about exactly the kind of structures that Jeff was talking about, where third-party ownership of the battery storage is entirely possible, but the performance payments come to the homeowner, the ratepayer. So there's plenty of precedent for structures like that, and make sure that the benefits are coming to the community again threefold, right? Um, uh, there's there's um, there's another question here, and this is really specific to New Orleans, so I'm probably the wrong guy to answer this, although I certainly have an opinion about it. Entergy New Orleans is quick to tell us that the batteries actually cost way too much, and they bring long-term administrative costs. And I'm just curious, maybe if I could ask JD to talk to the technology and the structure a little bit. And then Jeff, I'm gonna throw this back to you, and Zach here after that, because I would guess that we've already got a VPP program working in the area, and there ought to be some hard data that can help us out. So, JD, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm not familiar with the comments from the ENO. However, and I'm not sure what they're basing it off of. Today's battery chemistry is LFP, which today is the most efficient, most reliable, safest battery chemistry on the market. Manufacturers are going to have 10 to 15-year warranties on their equipment. For the most part, these installations, when installed correctly, have very little service required. It's really a set it and forget it technology. I wish I could speak a little bit more on what Entergy was getting at, but just in my experience, these systems are very reliable when installed correctly.
I think also before we move over to Jeff and then Zach, um, I would also think though when we something that didn't get any points on the priorities, which I think is appropriate by the way, folks, but when you have something like tech neutrality, which basically makes sure that we don't lock things up to a particular vendor or to a particular solution, that automatically starts to put pressure on the price and the cost of implementing something like this because more players can participate, and there's a bit of a motive there to really sort of move closer to democratization of this. Would you agree to a comment like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because you have EPCs that utilize certain equipment. Also, a lot of systems aren't one size fits all. One battery application or manufacturer might work for one install versus another. Also, yeah, if installers have preferences on what they utilize, there can be opportunity costs to getting trained on that equipment if it's not something that also if it's not a particular architecture that they're used to. There could be issues down the line on that end as well. So you certainly want to create redundancy there to make sure that you have a range of different manufacturers and that way folks are able to find the best application, and you're making sure that you have EPCs that are knowledgeable on what they're utilizing.
Yeah, I think I'm remembering from another VPP webinar that I was part of recently. There are companies like Energy Hub, right? Who I think is helping Entergy run the current VPP they've got. And then there's another company that I'm familiar with called Flex Energy, and their whole job is to make sure that the complexity of different suppliers and different protocols and different details actually are taken care of by a professional group that manages that compatibility and that performance on behalf of the utility. So in a sense, it keeps it with an easy button rather than turning this into something that's really onerous for the utility itself. I'm sensitive to the time. We only got about 10 minutes left, so we're actually gonna finish off this question because Jeff, I'd love for you to chat, say a couple of things on this topic if you'd like, and then we'll ask Zach to weigh in as well. I know Zach's got a couple of points.
Got it. And I have to apologize. I was actually answering one of the online questions. So bring me back
Well,
what topic we're on.
why don't we move it to Zach and we can come back to you, give you a chance to absorb it a little bit. Go ahead, Zach.
Good.
Yeah, I would just say that on top of everything that folks said, like when you talk about the return on investment for these things, right? Entergy has a particular lens on it as a utility company, but from a community perspective, there's a lot more of an ROI. You think about when you deploy a battery in somebody's home, right? In addition to the benefit to the energy system, it means when a hurricane happens and they still have power, all the food in the refrigerator that otherwise would spoil, right? They're able to maintain and to feed their family in a crisis, right? Like that is an additive benefit that doesn't necessarily get into utility analysis, but from a community perspective is critical. In a community setting, some of these churches that Jeff mentioned that have these community resilience centers, this means that, medicines that people have in the community that have to stay refrigerated, or people can charge their devices and make sure that they're staying in touch with loved ones during an emergency. That is part of the ROI. It's a different type of ROI, but the whole point of this is it's an and, not an or. And so when you layer in the benefits to the energy system as a whole and those benefits to the community, all of a sudden it's a huge ROI, particularly around the folks that are most vulnerable in situations like this when the power goes out.
But that's fantastic. Jeff, any thought here?
I think what I've been looking at, I do see a lot of concern. I mean, there was a question about the costs that came up with, Entergy has stated that they have like high costs in these battery systems and it's not cost effective and all that. And I did want to touch on that. I mean, I think and thank you for the question, John. Every time, we lay technologies out side by side, you can put costs and benefits on it in a very linear way. I think what's important, and New Orleans knows this better than anywhere, is that you can't just put a price on one unit and expect that to be the representation of what it does. I mean, we got from Entergy a cost of what it was going to cost us to run a nuclear power plant, and over the years, those costs have been multiplied multiple times over. And, the whole funding that this project is coming from is actually from cost overruns on those projects, and from excess charges that the city residents have received. So I think the good thing about this program is it's fairly straightforward about what it's going to do and where the funds are going to go, and there's not going to be a cost to ratepayers on it. The problem that New Orleans has is that no matter how strong we build our grid, we're going to have problems in the future because of the strengths of the storms, because of how, you have data centers and LNG terminals that are going to be loading up our rates, and putting more stress on the grid over time. So this is a lot more about the community taking over, taking more power back into the community for how they operate on their own, bringing the grid from something we literally, as a few months ago, used to get some of our power from Arkansas. So there's a lot of copper that has to happen between here and Arkansas for us to keep our grid up. This is bringing it down into our own neighborhoods, and literally the Together New Orleans Lighthouse program. Their mission is to have a place within 15 minutes you can walk and have power no matter what's happening with the rest of the grid. So if you think about what the benefits are, you can't simply put a one item, one number on one item and say this is the value of it, and you have to compare it to this next item. And so I'm not really buying into that. I think that you have a lot of benefits for the cheapest power sources. You have a lot of benefits for renewables. You have a lot of benefits for energy storage and distributed energy, and they're all a little bit different. And I think what's important that we're discovering recently is you need all of them. You can't rely on one of anything right now to get us a stable grid or to get the services that we need into our communities. So this is a lot more about finding the cheapest power source. We've been doing that for a long time, and it only works to a degree. So we're taking back into our communities the power and the control of where these sources come from.
So this is just part of an all of the above strategy then, Jeff, right?
Definitely, I think where everybody is looking at it, yes.
Everybody's got to throw in, and there's plenty of room for everybody to grow and benefit here. So that's fantastic. All right, guys, we got 5 minutes, and then we all got to get on with the rest of our days. I'm gonna tee up one last thing, and I'm gonna start with Zach on this one. Zach, let me see if I can posit this question. If you were to sort of very briefly give 2 points, if you were to pick one critical success factor, one recommendation of a do, make sure you do, and then one example of make sure you don't, what would those two examples be?
Yeah, I think that make sure you do is to make sure that when we build this highway, there is a lane on the highway that works for the folks who have the least resources to put in, but the greatest need. It's not the whole highway, but make sure you at least have a lane for folks like that. And I think the flip side for number two is that, like, what we say don't do is don't assume that, like, all the lanes are starting with the same framework, right? Make sure that, if you're thinking about a lane for those folks, you think about it with those folks in mind and starting with them. For the people who have resources, you create a different thing. Don't assume it's sort of like a single approach with little tweaks. Find the different market segments and make sure that we're addressing them in a way that meets those folks where they're at.
So make sure all the lanes are on the same highway.
Same highway, but designed for each kind of car, right? And that way the fast people can go fast, and the people who have that older car can still make it to work.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. That's succinct. JD, you're up. What would be your make sure you do and make sure you don't?
I mean, this is probably more on the end user side, and maybe just the community side, but make sure you do look into like local EPCs. I mean, New Orleans or Louisiana in general had a booming solar industry at one point, with incentives and tax credits, which it kind of fell to the wayside. And I think this is a great opportunity for economic growth, jobs, things like that, on the EPC side for installation companies, what have you. Don't let's say, I mean, don't stop advocating for the community and advocating for programs like this. As we kind of talked about, it's a pie that can be increased. It's not just one small pie that's going to be divvied up. If we're able to deploy this efficiently, it should just be exponential moving forward and just increase value for homeowners and installation companies. So.
Fantastic. Thanks. Jeff?
I'm always have a controversial position on this, but I think the most important thing we can do, or maybe do, is make sure we're using the resources. I would say stretch out the funding for this program as much as we can. You're going to need elements like LMI that are going to need a lot more resources to make them work. But you also have an existing market that we don't need to overload the market with funding to help promote it, right? We can actually do a lot with a little to spur activity, and we should be efficient about using it. We should just be efficient about, the funds that are there and make the best use and stretch those out along with credits and everything else as much as we can. And I think what we don't want to do is, I think it's important to be tech neutral, but I think it's important to sort of qualify and monitor, trust and verify to a degree, and make sure that the technologies going in are going to be good for the end users. There is a lot of say poor quality materials out in the market, and so the same way that California has, the CEC program. That how you qualify an equipment and how you make sure that if work is being done in this program, it's being done to a good quality level, and that we're doing right by the ratepayers and the end users in this, and going to roll out a program that's going to be an equipment that's going to be reliable, going to be maintained, and is going to have a good future. So I think we can write this program that works really well, and let's just make sure we have good front end and back end to it, and make the best use, make it a great example for something that the city wants to extend and could be a model for the rest of the country.
So thanks for that. And folks, it's time to wrap up. So first, I want to start with thank yous. Thank you to Jazria for setting this up. We've recorded this, and I'm going to come back to that point here in just a second. The next thing I'd like to do is thank our panelists. I think Monique has done a fantastic job of bringing some panelists together that come from different origin points, but they've really come together to provide a really nice, coherent mosaic around the way this can be a win-win-win for the community, for the utility, for resilience and continuity of energy, and therefore growth in the New Orleans area, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I'll leave you with a final thought, and that is this. You've taken your time today for an hour to listen to some points of view from people who have experience doing this, not only around the nation and with certain technologies, but also in New Orleans proper. We've got a laundry list of successes already that have come together, things that we can build on, expertise that we can tap. And I want all of you to know as listeners, talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues. The city is a little challenged in being able to hear some of these additional points of view, but the city has an opportunity to listen to a recording. And remember, you don't make change happen unless you actually get involved. Make sure you get involved. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, everybody.
Cool.
Thanks for tuning in.